Here. No, there is no one here who wishes to make a comment. Thank you. Yes, I will. Yes.
Schneider?
Yes.
Vella?
Yes.
And Zichterman?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Wonderful, thank you. We will move on then to public comment. Members of the public may address the committee on any issues not on
are really important because sometimes it's the things that get lost. And that first bullet, BAWSCA's role in managing the water supply agreement with San Francisco to protect the member agency's financial and water supply interests. This is one of those ones where every year we put this on here. There's certain things we know we have to do, and sometimes things show up, and we also have to deal with them at the last minute. You have in your packet some letters that were sent from me just this last month, and those letters and that activity fall really within this kind of work plan item, right? Things that the member agencies expect us to do to protect their interests. So I just want to call that out because sometimes those aren't always so obvious because they're not the hot, sexy topics, if you will. Oversight of San Francisco's WSIP, our engagement with San Francisco's alternative water supply plan and its implementation, initiating the development of BAWSCA Strategy 2050, which I'm very excited about, and also updated regional water demand and conservation projections, and then adopting an updated Tier 2 drought plan, facilitating that adoption by the member agencies. And importantly, a continuation of what has been some of our core work since we began, which is implementing our core and subscription conservation programs. So a combination of policy, technical, contract administration, water resources is a very full work plan to achieve our goals. So when I spoke to you last month, we were looking at the preliminary work plan. What you have in front of you today is a proposed work plan, and it reflects some changes, as does the operating budget, reflects some changes that have been needed to be made over the last few months. So I'm going to call those out because they're pretty important. The first is initiate the development of the updated regional water demand projections. You'll recall when I spoke to you last month, we had an estimated number in there for what we thought the contract was going to be. I'm pleased to say we've got excellent bids, and this is a separate item for our discussion today, but we got 4 proposals, 3 of them in which we interviewed, very competitive, very excellent product, but in each case, the budgets were more than what we had originally estimated. And so the proposed work plan in front of you now reflects the recommended cost with the recommended consultant contract. So in particular, it's an increase in the budget for next year by $150,000, and then in fiscal year 25-26 just by $5,000, so much less in that second year. There's also the work plan item, possible proposed water supply agreement amendment with San Francisco regarding minimum purchases. This has been a topic that we, as a staff, have talked about quite a bit with San Francisco over the years. Knowing that there was a proposal from San Francisco, but really having to be responsive to San Francisco with that proposal, that activity has increased significantly in the last 2 months, and I expect it to increase in the first couple months, in the beginning months next fiscal year. So I've increased model, which was a proprietary model with our former consultant, and we had a subscription program basically to help the agencies if they wanted to have access to that consultant. So we eliminated that program. And then our BAWSCA internship program, unfortunately, I'm going to say is on hold for this summer. We were unable to secure both an interested and qualified candidate through our work with Eastside. And so we put it on hold for this summer, but we have talked with them about how do we engage more fully with the students and the community early on to kind of get more interest in BAWSCA. So it just identified that we needed to do some more upfront work, but there was no way to kind of counteract that at the point by the time we did the interviews. So that is just on hold. Budget will fully fund the agency's annual OPEB expenses. Importantly, it includes a budget allowance for salary adjustments. So for the last 20 years. The result of the operating budget, when you divide it by the persons in the service area, is that the BAWSCA's budget comes out to a total cost per water customer of $3 for next year, which is an increase in 7 cents per person. On the right, I think it's important to kind of focus on, when we talk about our budget, how does it relate to the agency's goals? At the end of the day, you really are, where you spend your money is an indication of your priorities. And reliable supply has always been the largest bucket, a lot of times because there's consultant contracts, things like that, projects and studies, and that's continuing to be the same, with 55% of the budget being allocated for that reliable supply goal. But water at a fair price is at 11.5%, and that's definitely an increase this year. Agency operations, basically a third, and then a small sliver for high water quality, because really we have a very small but designated role related to water quality. So in considering how to fund the operating budget, BAWSCA achieve the desired work plan results, spend only what is needed to achieve those results, apply incremental and prudent increases in assessments as necessary, and maintain a prudent general reserve balance within the board guidelines. And the board guidelines is to have a general reserve of 20 to 35% of the operating budget. Currently, I'm estimating we'll spend 90 to 95% of the approved budget this year. This year's funding plan, so to fund this year, there was no increase in assessments. You're able to fully fund it from the existing assessments. And right now, the general reserve balance is a little over 1.5 million, which is 31% of your current adopted operating budget. Those numbers change slightly with one of the actions that's on this. Your general reserve at 20% of your operating budget, what did your assessment increases need to be, right? So that's kind of like if you say, I want to target the low end of my general reserve. I want to take as much from general reserve as I can to make my assessment increase as small as possible. That would be 7%. On the far side, option 5 is do assessment increase for everything and take nothing from the general reserve. Again, I would never recommend that option. Option 4 is just midway in between to try to get a sensitivity. I'm really recommending either option 2 or option 3. A 9% assessment increase would leave you with a general reserve at 21% of your budget. A 10% assessment increase would leave you at a general reserve of 22%. I know there's at times a sensitivity about a double-digit rate increase. Historically, I have to say I haven't necessarily heard that from the BAWSCA agencies, but it's certainly something I respect, which is why I offered option 2. So I think I can live with either. I would recommend either option 2 or option 3, a 9% assessment increase or a 10%. The 10% certainly puts you at a little better spot with your general reserve balance, but either of them leave you with a reserve balance that's basically at that lower end of your level. But it is a lower end of your level with a larger budget number, right? So that's also important to remember. So with that, the recommendation to the committee is that you recommend the board adopt the fiscal year work plan for the proposed fiscal year work plan for 24-25 and results to be achieved, the proposed operating budget of 5614518, and then hopefully one or the other recommended funding plan, option 2 or option 3. And that concludes my remarks.
There we go. We're still working out all our technical little nuances. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the report, and I would like to take in any questions and any comments from any of the directors. Ms. Dorr first.
Thank you. Hello. My first question is a clarifying question. So in the report, it says, I appreciate the estimates per water customer, because I think that is most relevant when we think back to who we're serving as we sit on this board. It says estimated cost to the water customer of $3 per person per year. Is that per water customer per year?
Per resident.
Per resident. So what is the total cost, estimated cost for a water customer of increase?
The proposed operating budget of $5,614,518.
I understand that, but I'm curious, does that mean on average there are 4 people in a home, so that would be $12 per year per water customer? I'm looking for what is a total?
By account, you mean, like per customer account?
Per account, yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, generally, we assume, I think, 3 people per household.
It's 2.3,
so, yeah.
2.7
So
if
it's
I
just
remember
based upon your calculation of what you think could be $9. Yeah, $9 to $10 per household.
Thank you. I think that number is helpful to kind of sense of not just $3 doesn't seem as much, and $10 is not that much either, but seeing it by user account, I think would be a helpful metric as we think about the individual folks that we're representing here. So request for that moving forward. And also here, with the proposed assessment increases that were on the last page with the 5 different options, what would the different estimated cost per water customers look like based on these different scenarios?
I do not have that calculated at this point. I guess one, but I could provide that for sure. But it would be less than that one cost, because that just assumed, the way the cost per household is now calculated, it assumes the whole operating budget as a cost, that's a cost. Through the funding, you're basically saying, I'm going to take some out of my bank and I'm going to reduce that cost perceptually by something. I don't know what that is, but it's something we could calculate.
I think seeing that number to understand, to put this in context of what this means for our ratepayers would be helpful. So that would be great to have at the full board meeting. Those are my questions for right now.
Thank you so much. Director Ragsdale? Yes.
Off the topic of numbers, but just a really brief comment is I enjoyed last summer at the tour, getting at the Hetch Hetchy tour, getting to interact with the intern. Thought she was so impressive and fabulous, and I just want to thank you for continuing to work with the school in East Palo Alto to bring that program back for next summer. So I just wanted to thank you for that continuing engagement.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Schneider and then Director Pierce.
Along the line with Director Dort.
You have to bring the microphone.
Bring it close.
No,
There we
you
go.
just have to have, it's directional. It needs to point at you. There you go.
Okay. We're told, okay. Would it be possible to get option 2 and 3, possibly option 7, broken down by agency?
Sure.
Yeah, just another slide with that.
Yeah.
So I know you asked for customer, I'm kind of the cost per city, and then how we would, or cost per agency, excuse me, and then how we're going to tell our customers, which would be that information. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Director Pierce?
Thank you. I was just curious, Nicole, does the current budget include any of the additional work that you think may be necessary given the current discussion with the SFPUC regarding the wholesale water fixed charge situation? Is that included in there?
It is. I will say, though, the increases, some of those increases are reflecting of the balance that we had to do, and that's where I wanted to put more money in the meter charge, because that's another one of those items, and I said, okay, between the two of them, we need more money. So it now does reflect what I at least think we need at this point. So
Okay,
the answer is yes.
Okay, and then I guess I would say we'll just have to consider this potentially a heads up in terms of legal costs that will be required, because anytime you do discussions regarding the water supply agreement, there's an implication with legal. And I think it's important for us to remember that the charges that go to the customers are more likely to be impacted by what San Francisco is charging all of our agencies for the water and our own costs for the different water agencies than whatever BAWSCA charges and those incremental increases. I know everything adds up, but I just wanted to put it into context. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pierce. Director Dwyer?
2001, San Francisco has not done regional demand projections for the wholesale customers. They have relied upon BAWSCA to perform the regional demand projections for the entire wholesale customer base as a single process, like we're proposing, and then we provide that information to them. Those numbers are then developed with the member agencies and are incorporated in their adopted urban water management plans. So there is no redundancy.
Thank you for sharing that. And then 2 comments I have. One, when we look at the work plan, I'm glad that we're doing these meetings by live stream, and I'm glad that this is creating a way to create some transparency. I just want to note and voice here again that I'm really excited to see us move towards a hybrid option, so members of the public can participate in this meeting remotely as well. And my other comment, I know over, I guess, last fall, we were talking about budgets for CEO bonuses. And I was told, well, you should have mentioned this earlier in the year. And so now is the moment that I can mention this. And I just want to note that the benchmarking of bonuses in the packet and in our budget is somewhat concerning for me. And I worry about the optics of a public agency like BAWSCA providing bonuses in this way, and would feel a lot more comfortable if we found, if we don't feel that the CEO is being fairly compensated, that is incorporated into the salary, as opposed to having this discretionary subjective bonus process that's being benchmarked by having a number slated out here in the packets for the board members, directors. And so just want to note that this is something that continues to concern me, and I'd like to see us explore other avenues to make sure our CEO is fairly compensated.
Thank you. I guess your question got asked. Director Sigerman, you got that answered or asked? Did you have something else?
Yeah, but I had a comment about the funding options, and I think I can defer that till we have a motion to.
Yes,
address
please. Later on, or? Okay, all right. Now, the recommendation we are looking for to go back to the entire BAWSCA board is the work plan and the results to be achieved, the proposed operating budget, and the recommended funding plan, either option 2 or option 3. So if there's no questions, I know I have been very vocal, and because I also serve with Valley Water, and they have put 9.9 as their, and it started to feel like you were going to the gas station and pretending that it wasn't really close to that higher number. If we're going to go with 10, we need to go with 10. If we're going to go with 9, then we need to go with 9. I think being more upfront with our ratepayers is a better option than to pretend that we're not at a double digit. So that would be my thought. Do I have a recommendation or a motion for a recommendation? Director Zigerman.
Well, I'm not quite ready to make a motion, but I
Oh.
think we gotta.
I'm afraid it's not on. Is it on? Okay.
How about now?
There
we
you
go.
go. Please doesn't have.
I'm not ready to make a motion, but I think we ought to think about the increase in assessments that we want to do to properly fund a really good, ambitious work plan that takes into account our current water use conditions. We're not in a period where we're in a drought and have to really cut back expenses. So maybe we ought to take advantage of this good high use year to increase the assessments in a way that reduces the hit on the general reserve. So I'm kind of leaning toward 4, going a little bit higher than the recommended this time. Not, so I can make a proposal or a motion to that effect, or we can continue to discuss our leanings before we have a formal motion. It's up to you.
Okay. I would ask Ms. Sandkulla, because that wasn't, option 4 wasn't one you specifically talked about, and we've been asked about specific ratepayers. I do remember hearing a discussion years ago about NASA and the gentleman who did the funding and went out to the public with what that would cost. He said, you get the same reaction from people, anything over $1 million, you get the same reaction, whether it's $1 million, 10 million, 100 million. So he made the point of breaking it down, dividing it by a population or by a household or something to help people to put that in context. So I'm wondering if if we can do that real quick with just some numbers, or
Um,
where are we at?
Well, again, I would say, right, if you're looking at the differences between 9 and 10 and 11, say 11%, right, if you want to, you're looking at roughly, what's the difference there? It's like $50,000 every time. Again, I will say is the member agencies, from a cost perspective, BAWSCA continues to be very, very cost efficient for them, right? We are saving more money than we spend every year between our bond, the savings from the bonds, the savings from our WRR review. They continue at that level to be supportive and not concerned. There's not going to be a revolt at an 11%. But I do think it is, there's always those, it goes back to these principles, is that's a struggle of budgeting what you need and only asking for what you need so that the general reserve doesn't get too high. Because there has been times when I first came on board as the general manager, we had kind of whipsawing general reserves for a while. And we've worked hard to try not to do that, and I think that's put us in a pretty good spot, which is why I stuck with these two recommendations. But certainly, if the board would like to go with an 11% assessment increase, or option 4, I mean, I don't personally have a problem with it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Director Schneider and then Chair Chambers.
I know some of.
It takes a minute. There you go.
I know some of us represent water agencies across jurisdictions, and some of us are jurisdiction specific. If you're jurisdiction specific, last night we raised, or have to raise, our fire 8%, our police 5% or 6% over and over, and most of us are looking at the state cutting into other revenues that we have. So I would be hesitant to go too high, because with my other hat, I'm balancing multiple funds that are all going up. The question you brought up, though, and I guess I should know this, my community, my district, is very price sensitive, both in garbage and in water, to the point where we look ramshackle because people won't water even their trees on that. And now our population has grown, so we're actually officially over 23,000. Woo! And we'll continue to grow as these housing projects go. Would that counter any reductions from populations that are, I'm still putting water buckets in the shower, and we're still not flushing our toilets every time. So we have not gone back to any pre-drought time. So your comment of, should we do it now while there's a lot more water being sold? The only way I can think of that is a ban on bottled water in city facilities, which we're looking at, instead of using our lovely Hetch Hetchy water. I mean, that's one thing we can do. I'm just not sure we're at that point that you mentioned. Maybe we are, and I'd love to see the data.
Thank you, Director Schneider. Director Chambers?
And I'd like to say that, even though we're not in a drought now, some of us have some pretty major capital improvement projects to do. And we're doing, I know we're going to have a 218 notice coming out soon to fund some of our CIP at the local level. So I'm really leaning towards option 2 or option 3. And I know that it looks like in option 2 we're only 21%, but realize that this year's budget we're planning on spending 90 to 95%. We can't guarantee it's only going to be 90 or 95%, but any extra we have this year goes into the reserve. So I'm comfortable. I don't think we need to take the reserve to 24%. I think I'm happy with 21 or 22%. So I would really strongly vote in favor of 9 or 10.
Okay.
Or options 2 or 3.
Are you ready to make a motion, or?
Okay, I'll move. I'll move items 1, 2 on the projector, and also 3. And should we have the full board decide between 2 or 3? Is that, or do you want a decision? on
You
this
can
one?
bifurcate it. You're making the motion.
Let's,
You want a coin?
If
well,
you
let's
wanna
say option, the 9% option. lower the two.
So I have a motion to accept the proposed fiscal year budget work plan, and then the budget and the recommended option 2. That's your motion? Do I have a second to that? Okay. Thank you. Do you have a second? Okay.
Yes,
Luis?
I do second
Yes.
that. Only because of I was going to explain that only because of the issue of the reserve, but he made the motion, so. but
Okay,
second that.
wonderful. Did you want to comment? Because both of you had. Director Phil, okay. Do we have any more discussion on that? Director, because they need to know to turn it on. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I was just saying a comment about my preference on the CEO bonus. Barring any conversation about that, or without a conversation there, I don't feel as comfortable moving on this decision, and wanted to see if there's a moment of conversation that could be had now or in the full board meeting to talk about that more.
Oh, I'll let Ms. Sandkulla answer to that over time frame.
So I can provide clarity for what's in the operating budget. What's in the operating budget is a budget allowance of $24,998, which is, as it's consistent with the direction that's been received from the board for the last 12 years about providing a budget allowance for the board to use to have available in the event that they make a decision about my salary in September, right? Because previously, before that, there was no budget allowance. So kind of like I have an allowance for staff budgets, there was no budget allowance for the CEO for a salary increase. So it had to, by definition, come out of the general reserve because it wasn't budgeted. So the board gave me direction to put a budget allowance in there for them to have access to. It doesn't approve anything. It doesn't authorize anything. It just becomes an available budget in which, when the board makes a decision in September, you have monies to draw upon for any salary increase.
Wouldn't there still be funds that we could draw from in the case that in September we decided to?
You would have to draw from the general reserve. That is it. That's all. That's the other choice.
Right, and I'm concerned. I'm confused about what's the issue with that.
The decision at the time was the board felt uncomfortable not determining that there needed to be a budget allowance for it and just relying upon use of the general reserve. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. I do not see any more, so we will call the question. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, and just to confirm, this is for the recommendation on the board adoption of the proposed fiscal year work plan and results to be achieved. Operating budget of 5. Oh, yes. Public comment.
Yes, thank you. Public comment. Do I have any public comment on the motion? Thank you. I do not hear any. Now we may go on with the vote. Thank
Okay.
you. That's what we have legal counsel for.
Thank you. The proposed operating budget of $5,614,518 and recommended funding plan option 2. All right. Chair Hardy.
Yes.
Vice Chair Ragsdale.
Yes.
Chambers. Dorr. Duncan. Pierce.
Yes.
Schneider. Vella. Zichterman. And the motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This will go on to the regular board meeting as a recommendation. Action item 5B, authorize consultant contract with Hazen and Sawyer to develop a regional water demand and conservation project study. And this is Ms. McPherson will give us the report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members. This forward. All right. So BAWSCA issued a request for proposals for an update to the, excuse me, regional demand and conservation projections. We call these demand studies, so this will be the 2025 demand study. BAWSCA conducts these on a 5-year basis to develop transparent and defensible demand projections for each of the BAWSCA agencies. And these are used to support their development of their UWMPs. The next ones are due in July of 2026. Their conservation and planning to implement making conservation a California way of life, which is currently in the rulemaking process. And then also for regional efforts, for example, Strategy 2050, which you'll hear again about today. And is that? Okay. Excellent. So we issued the RFP. This is, just to give you an update on our schedule. We issued the RFP on January 3rd of this year. We received 4 proposals in February on the 16th. We're really excited to see so many competitive proposals for this project. We did interview 3 of those proposers that are listed here on March 8th. We had a review panel that consisted of 2 BAWSCA employees, 2 BAWSCA agency representatives, and then an outside expert. And consistently throughout the reviewer and the review panel, the firm Hazen and Sawyer scored the highest. They also really stood out in the interview process. So we selected the consultant on March 15th, and we are currently working through the contracting process, and that's expected to begin in July of this year. Next slide. I'll just let you do it. Sorry. All right, so we are breaking this project up into 2 phases, primarily because the work that's produced in phase 1 is necessary for the agencies to develop their urban water management plans. So this phase is to be completed by June of next year. The work that's going to be included in this includes general data collection and review, baseline and future demand analysis. We'll be calculating their urban water use objective. That's part of that Making Conservation a California Way of Life. Conservation program analysis and selection, then just general member agency coordination and some stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement on this phase is primarily going to be focused on that conservation program analysis and selection. We'll have 3 technical memos that are produced through this phase and 27 individual agency models. I'll just note that you might say we have 26 agencies. That's because GVMI, or Guadalupe Valley Municipal Improvement District and Brisbane are operated together, so they're one single model, whereas Cal Water has 3 separate service areas, so they require 3 models. So 26 minus 1 plus 2 is 27, if that was confusing to anyone. And the budget for this phase 1 work is $550K. Next slide. So phase 2, this is sort of the building on that, like I said, that successful work with the sensitivity analysis. We'll have stakeholder engagement to select the scenarios that will be analyzed. We'll have that sensitivity analysis. BAWSCA is also looking at interested in this time creating a regional model that pulls in data from the 27 individual service area models. And then also looking at a new approach for considering future drought scenarios that consider things like demand hardening and actions that agencies and customers might take, which is a really interesting proposal that was brought forward by the consultant, and BAWSCA is really excited about. The work product for here is the 2 technical memorandums, and then also a final report that will document the entire process. And the budget for this phase is $260,000. Next slide. So the recommendation in front of the board today is that the committee recommend the board authorize the CEO and general manager to negotiate and execute an agreement with Hazen Sawyer, subject to legal counsel review, for a total amount of $810,000, with $260,000 subject to board approval as part of the fiscal year 2025-26 operating budget adoption, to complete the regional water demands and conservation projection study. And that concludes my comments.
Thank you. This is our time to ask questions. I'll maybe start with mine. I heard just a little bit of how this is different from what we've done before. And I notice it's 2 phases, 2 years. what are we hoping more from this that we have not had in the past?
Sure. So I think one thing that's going to be a very big difference for our member agencies is that the tools that the consultant is developing are open source and are developed in a way that their staff can make changes as perhaps they see things changing within their own service area and want to see how that's going to impact future demand, where previously we've been very satisfied with past demand studies, but it was a proprietary model that required that subscription program that Nicole mentioned. We're no longer going to take advantage of. That's one piece. The sensitivity analysis, I think we did a first round before, and I think we learned a lot, and we had really great response from the public and stakeholders on this. I think that this one with the demand forecasting expert on the consultant team, I think that they're going to be bringing new and additional insight into that process. The last two items on phase 2 are completely new projects for BAWSCA, and I would just also generally say demand projections are evolving over time and are more complex and nuanced every round compared to the first ones that BAWSCA led back in 2002.
Wonderful, thank you. Director Schneider?
Thank you. Do the modeling studies take into account new housing that jurisdictions are? So that will show that. And does it also account for any main water line and end user water line leak programs that we may have? Does it look at that?
There are projection estimates for water loss, distribution system water loss, if that's what you're referring to.
Well, it's that number one when I realized how much water we lose from water leaks, and we're trying to upgrade all of our infrastructure, and we have a one dig policy. So if we're fixing sewer, we're fixing everything else. I'm not saying we've got the capital improvement money for it, but if we're doing it, does that fit into the model?
Yes, so the answer is yes. Historically, those are one of the things where agencies kind of, if you go backcast and say, okay, what have been my water losses historically, and what am I projecting my losses to be moving forward, and based upon what? And that becomes part of the conversation that each agency has as part of the model development, right? Because sometimes it's not just, it's calculated, always ends up being a percentage, but the question is, moving forward, is it a percentage number, or maybe it becomes a different kind of, it's informed by other things, like major infrastructure improvements, different types of flushing and stuff like that. But that's where the nice thing is, with 27 individual models, each agency gets to have the ability essentially to, with a single platform and a single methodology, customize it to what's actually going to happen in their service area, so that they best account, at least for what you know is going to happen, right? There's always unknowns, but it's about trying to capture the knowns.
Well, the unknowns are the sheer number of water line breaks that hurt all of us on that. This is my last dumb question. For any of us who have to deal with RENA and our housing element, will the end result give us data to go back to ABAG or MTC or the state to say, you're asking us to add population that we don't have water for? So how are you going to help us? State of California, how are you going to help us? And that may be too much to ask for a study, but if that's one of the data points, that could be very useful.
So what this study will do, again, on an individual by each model, right? Each agency will have the ability to say, this is our projected number of housing that we need to meet, projected population, our projected growth in non-residential customers, and see the impact of that on their water supply picture. So that's what this will show.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Director Dorr?
My question is about, it mentions understand water demands, conservation savings under a range of hydrologic, climate, and other conditions. And I'm curious, will this include precipitation variability modeling, climate modeling at the regional scale? How detailed will this information be? I asked because when we, as a city, were looking at our stormwater management process, I asked if we're incorporating this data, and they said, no, we don't have the ability to do that in such a small scale, but if there are more regional efforts to do that, that could be used. And so will they be building novel models for us?
So I think the section you're actually quoting goes as part of the econometric modeling that develops the demand projections. And I think, but where your question, I think, fits is within the sensitivity analysis. It's a separate task item. And in that one, we will look at different hydrological conditions, different economies, a hot economy, a slow economy, high population growth, low population growth. And if you recall from the most recent demand study, or sorry, sensitivity analysis, we had, I think, 5 or 6 different scenarios. Is that right? With a combination of the looking at inputs that influence water consumption and a range of potential future outcomes, weather, precipitation, climate.
Was that directly drawing from NOAA data to make those models? Because I'm asking if it's built on the precipitation modeling from NOAA and from other federal agencies.
So no, my understanding is this is not going to be it's not going to say this is what we think is going to happen. It's rather, if this happens, so what are some possible scenarios? It's like a scenario planning. Right. What are some scenarios that we think might happen, informed by what NOAA said? Like maybe things might be this, or maybe things might be this way. So looking at some scenario building to see how sensitive our results are to that. But it won't be developing a separate hydrologic model about what we think might happen in a range of scenarios.
I see.
Makes sense.
Has BAWSCA ever used that kind of climatic modeling in its estimations in the past?
So no, the most we've done is in the last sensitivity analysis where we did scenario planning.
This is interesting to me, and I'd love to keep exploring this, because I wonder if there might be ways to not just create scenarios, but also say, based on what the research is saying might happen, what does this mean for not just our scenarios, but what we should be planning? Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Are there any questions from the public? Do not see any. Do I have a motion for the recommendation? Director Zickerman.
Thank you. Yes, I'll move that the recommendation that we recommend to the board that authorize CEO to negotiate and execute an agreement with Hazen Sawyer, subject to legal counsel review, for a total amount of $810,000, with $260,000 subject to future board approval as part of the FY25-6 operating budget, to complete the regional water demands and conservation projection study.
Thank you. Director Schneider? Okay, second. And I will say on the motion, I really appreciate the explanation of what we've done in the past and what this gives us more. I'm sorry?
She did. Yeah.
Yes, I did. I remembered. I made myself a big note, too. Wonderful. If I do not hear any other comments on the motion, we'll take a roll call vote.
All right, Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ragsdale,
Yes.
Chambers, Dorr, Duncan, Pierce,
Yes.
thank you, Schneider, Vella, and Zichterman. Motion passes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the questions and the concern and the digging into those details. That helps everyone. We're up to number 6, reports and discussions.
Nope, we have one more action item.
Oh, that's right, we do. I just wanted to push it too far. That's right. You're right.
I almost did too.
Oh, you're right. We're at 5C, Second Amendment to Hanson, Bridgett Professional Services. This means we need to pay for our lawyers, please.
Yes. Again, thank you very much, committee members. BAWSCA works very closely with legal counsel every year when we put together the budget that you all just talked about. We actually go through on a work plan by work plan item basis and identify hours, level of effort that we think needs to happen. And we really do that to make sure that we have the right resources, and we work hard not to over-resource legal counsel. I'm very cognizant of that. And so through that process, their existing contract right now is $891,000. But because we do that, there is often the case where new or unanticipated items will show up, and it depends upon that need to be addressed and accommodated. Things that, back to that work plan item, taking actions necessary to protect the member agency's interests in the water supply agreement. we're often responsive to San Francisco in that item. And that's one of the things that has shown up this year. And in this instance, this new and unanticipated item is really requiring a contract amendment for legal counsel so that we have the resources necessary. And I think it's important because my intent is always to have as much transparency as possible about the resources we're using, and especially when we need more legal counsel support for work. In particular, the items that have shown up since you actually acted on the last amendment in January on legal counsel that have needed resources amendment related to minimum purchase obligations, which I talked about a little bit before, which has taken on more time than we were anticipating in January. The result is that at this time of the year, I now need a budget increase. The estimate is $84,000 for legal counsel so we can continue to complete the remaining critical work this fiscal year. This increase can be funded by a transfer from the general reserve. It would increase the operating budget to $5,067,419, and it would result in a general reserve at 29% of the revised operating budget. So here is the recommendation. Note that bullet 2, because I wasn't as clear in the memo that you have before you, just that this transfer would be an authorization of a transfer from the general reserve to the operating budget. It's implied, but it wasn't clear, so I wanted to make that very clear in the modified recommendation before you on this slide. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding this correctly, these are reactionary to 3 actions, SFPUC, that have occurred just within the last 3 months?
Correct.
And this is to make certain we have the resources to make certain we cover our interests.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes, please, Director Zuckerman.
Thank you. Can you remind me what the recommended or policy that we have in place is for the General Reserve Fund?
Yeah, the policy is that the general reserve be between 20 and 35% of the adopted budget.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because we're hitting it again here.
I know.
Good
Okay,
question.
thank you.
Want to make certain we're covering ourselves on all edges. I do not see any other questions. Do I have any from the general public? Do not see any. Do I have a motion? Director Schneider.
Motion that the committee recommends to the board authorizing the CEO General Manager to, 1, amend the professional service contract with Hanson Bridgett by $84,000 for a total not to exceed amount of $975,000. 2, authorize a transfer of $84,000 from the general reserve to the operating budget. And 3, increase the approved FY 23-24 operating budget by $84,000 to $5,067,419. Thank you for having it there.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Director Feely? Okay. Thank you so much. Do we have any other comments on the motion? No comments from the general public. Looking for on our online. I do not see any more discussion. If we can have a roll call vote, please.
Yes, Chair Hardy,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bagsdale,
Yes.
Chambers, Dorr, Duncan, Pierce,
Yes,
thank you, Schneider, Vella, and Zichterman. And the motion passes.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I feel we have a budget, we have a plan, and we have the support. And we can support our interests. Wonderful. Now we'll go on to number 6, reports and discussions. And Ms. McPherson, update on negotiation of the Tier 2 drought plan, because you have nothing else to do.
It would seem that way sometimes. But we are making continued progress towards the June deadline that the agencies have set for themselves. And They have robust conversation about meeting that deadline, so it's quite apparent to them. However, we are always tracking that and considering the expiration of the existing Tier 2 plan at the end of this calendar year. And if it appears that we will not have unanimous adoption by the BAWSCA agencies before that date, BAWSCA will begin starting with updates to this policy committee and then to the full board.
Two is put in place, then that will supersede it. Is that correct?
That is one of the options that the board could put into place when you take your action in November, if you did that, yes.
Well, I hear really good reports about the robust discussion and that things are moving along pretty well. So I personally have high hopes. Thank you. I appreciate your time on that. Any directors have questions about the Tier 2? Director Zuckerman.
Thank you. I wonder if there's some way to encourage from the board or board policy committee to the representatives or negotiators that we really would like to see this concluded this year.
That's an interesting encouragement. I do know we have a list of those who are working on that, and directors are very free to make certain they do what they feel they need to help move things along.
Yeah, and one more point. Are there any associated side issues that are maybe not interfering, but also kind of being brought up, such as minimum purchase or other things? And is there any need to address some of those at the same time?
I guess from a water perspective, you're asking, is anyone damming up the procedure? Wonderful. We'll let the CEO answer that.
You are correct, Director Zichterman. The minimum purchase amendment, the proposed amendment from San Francisco is circling around as part of this process as well. Because those agencies that are subject to a minimum purchase obligation, and in particular one, has made it very clear they feel it needs to be addressed as part of Tier 2. That is just part of a multi-party negotiation, right? So.
Well, there we hope for a resolution of both, maybe.
Yes, and as the chair said, I would encourage all of you to reach out to your contacts that are negotiating this for your appointing agency. We had a significant conversation about this schedule. That is kind of my job in these meetings. I get to be the one that talks about the schedule, and I get to play the heavy hand. And so they're all very aware that, come June, some of this information is going to start to be discussed in this forum, which is a very different forum. And that should make them uncomfortable. And so, so we are at the point now where pressure has to be applied on all sides.
I have a bullwhip you can borrow if you'd like to take it to the next meeting.
As long as your name's on it, it's fine by me.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that so many of the directors have been proactive in this, and I appreciate that. Okay, that was a report, and we'll go then to 6B, BAWSCA's long-term reliability water supply. Ms. Ashoori, I hope I said that correct?
Yes. All right, good afternoon. We are going to provide some further information on the status of the scope development for Strategy 2050. So as seen in the timeline on this slide, for April of 2024, we are on track in completing the scope development this fiscal year with really, helpful input from both the board and the WMR. In the BPC Strategy 2050 memo, we provided the draft scope of work that we have developed, which we will be going through today. And we're hoping to receive any feedback you have at this time. And will be presenting the draft scope of work at the board meeting next month. So we really anticipate that the scope of work will be finalized in the coming weeks, and that we will present a recommended action for moving forward with the consultant and for Strategy 2050 in July. I'll move to the next slide. So to give a little background, we first
began with developing the scope of work for Strategy 2050 by establishing a purpose for it. And with discussions with both the board and WMR, we revised the purpose to identify the water supply and demand management needs and opportunities for the BAWSCA region and establish a framework to collectively support water reliability and resilience. So from there, we received further information from the WMRs through what we call a needs assessment. And with the results from an agency survey that we had sent out to each of the agencies, we used that information to develop 6 specific Strategy 2050 objectives to achieve the purpose shown on this slide. So those 6 objectives were to, 1, provide a comprehensive picture of the region's supply and demand management needs and options. 2 was to establish a framework for collectively maintaining and improving regional water supply reliability and resilience. The 3rd was to elevate awareness and support the region's interest in new and emerging regulations that impact water supply and demand management. The 4th was to expand regional dialogue and collaboration to collectively address common needs. The 5th was to close the gap on funding needed for water supply resilience and reliability. And finally, the 6th was to support availability of affordable water supply and demand management strategies to all customers. And these 6 objectives are in addition to BAWSCA's work to oversee the WSA and align with BAWSCA's goal of a reliable supply of high-quality water at a fair price. So after establishing the objectives, the purpose and objectives of Strategy 2050 was then used to support the identification of 7 key tasks for the scope of work, which we will be going through today and has been provided in the BPC Strategy 2050 memo. I'll move on to the next slide. So that first task that we came up with was to evaluate water supply and demand management reliability. And on the right, you see all the details that go into these key tasks. So the first was to conduct a risk assessment of water reliability. And what that means is to really review the potential risks impacting water supply reliability to the BAWSCA region. And this may include the impacts of climate change, evolving regulations, and other uncertainties on water supplies, both at the local agencies and the regional level. We would use what we have, the Riverware existing model, and quantify some of these effects of the stressors and risks on the water supply through identifying 4 potential future scenarios that reflect kind of a reasonable range of potential future scenarios or outcomes. It's kind of similar to our sensitivity analysis for the 2022 demand study, but looking a little more on the supply side of it. And then the second detail for that is to develop a preliminary water demand, supply, and reliability assessment for the 2025 Urban Water Management Plan. We have that demand study that we're going to be doing, but the work would also align with some of the other information that the agencies need to complete their 2025 Urban Water Management required tables and contents that they would be submitting. This would include, analyzing individual BAWSCA agency total water demand, water use efficiency potential, as well as water supply reliability risks. That third detail is to assess existing risks and emergency framework by really reviewing. That would focus on identifying vulnerabilities. And some of these include wildfires, earthquakes, sea level rise, and continued implementation of these emergency response plan frameworks. And then review will consider differences and potentially best practices in emergency planning and their responses, as well as their implementation across counties as well as individual agencies. And then finally, assess regional emergency resilience programs, really exploring some of the frameworks that the agencies have, as well as regional
entities outside of the BAWSCA region and see where we can kind of include some of the best practices into the emergency response within the BAWSCA region to both improve resources and coordination across BAWSCA agencies. Now, the second task is to assess the regulatory setting and collaboration opportunities, one of which being is to just identify what the regulatory setting currently is and understanding, what the current as well as the anticipated near-term and mid-term regulations impacting water management and project implementation. Some of these include water use efficiency requirements that are changing water quality, as well as potable reuse regulations and reporting requirements needed by the agencies. And so we would prepare a summary of up to 6 specific regulations and their requirements to see what the potential risks and opportunities might be for the BAWSCA regions, as well as, some of this including water supply availability, costs, and staffing implementations. And then that second detail for task 2 would be to assess framework for future regulatory collaboration. So really developing recommended actions for advancing regulatory collaborations through reviewing other regional frameworks. So looking at, potentially the Regional Water Authority and what they're doing and maybe applying that to the BAWSCA region. I'm going to move on to the next slide, looking at some of the other key tasks. So the third one is a longer one. I think that's one which includes, recycled water, groundwater, stormwater. So we would have this list that we have, and we would place it in a single shared database, and then refine some of the project details. So go a little more in depth with them, and include maybe the water yield, potential benefits, capital cost, O&M, as well as potential secondary benefits. So that can include community and environmental benefits, as well as some of the anticipated challenges for each project. The second is to develop additional water supply and demand management project concepts. So looking at other projects that we might include, up to 12 of them, and develop additional projects and the details that would focus on regional project opportunities. The third is to really develop some of these metrics. So metrics for comparing water supply projects and portfolios. So the metrics developed would evaluate project opportunities and may include cost, dry year reliability benefits, water quality impacts, regulatory complexity, and the speed of implementation, as well as some other factors. And then the next one is to really develop up to maybe 5 multi-project portfolios using that project inventory that we have to assess reliability benefits under those different scenarios. So looking at different combinations of projects. And then we would update the regional groundwater model. We have this in place already, but we would evaluate and identify whether refinements are needed with that groundwater model. It was most recently updated in 2018, and that was by the San Mateo County, and that incorporated new data. But we had established the regional groundwater model back during the 2015 strategy. So this subtask would really look at if we need to update the model and using the most updated data. And then the last subtask is really a subscription program similar to what we have for the conservation programs. But this would support the BAWSCA agencies in individual planning tasks if it goes beyond what is scoped at the regional level. This would include development of individual agency projects or other reliability planning and analysis that is needed by individual agencies. Now, the fourth key task is to provide support to member agencies in their efforts to obtain external funding. BAWSCA has almost completed the grant tracking tool, which we will be shared to the agencies this fiscal year. But we're also interested in expanding the grant tracking tool to really incorporate new funding opportunities as well as align with a project inventory that I explained in Task 3 to identify what projects that are both eligible and competitive for funding. And then for the next one is to establish a comprehensive regional funding strategy and advocacy approach to maximize the funding in the BAWSCA region. And this would outline potential opportunities, coordinate messaging, as well as recommend the next steps to obtain that funding. The third is providing funding support as a subscription program for each of the agencies to both project development to increase funding readiness, as well as preparation of grant applications and administering services that sometimes for agencies it's difficult to do. And lastly, during the Strategy 2050 development, state or federal funding opportunities might become available that align with Strategy 2050, scope of work or findings. So if a relevant funding opportunity becomes available, we will be preparing a funding application to offset or augment the Strategy 2050 funding. I'll move on to the next slide. Now we have just 3 more key tasks to go through. They're a little faster than the other ones. The 5th one is to document drinking water affordability challenges and opportunities, and really review what other state and regional findings and efforts related to affordability are, including work efforts from either individual agencies or others outside of the region to really identify some challenges and opportunities there. And then the next detail for 5 is to assess affordability programs. So really developing recommendations on potential programs and or models and track progress on the 2050 development. So this dashboard would really include some of the components within BAWSCA's existing WCDB that we have to help the BAWSCA agencies collaborate with some of these work efforts. And then the next is to develop Strategy 2050 decision support tool. This is a custom decision support tool that we could use it's really designed to connect all the data sources. So we have all this information that we have on the project inventory, and it will provide further capability to adjust some of these assumptions and prioritize alternatives. So in the decision support tool, for example, we can prioritize projects that would provide dry year reliability, or projects that would be developed in a shorter period of time than others. So it's easier for us to be able to analyze certain projects over others. And the tool would allow really us to plan for various scenarios. The next is develop metrics for progress tracking towards Strategy 2050 objectives, which would tie into the decision support tools. This may include level of service goals, metrics for regulatory compliance, and then metrics for funding or affordability. And then finally for that one is to develop initial Strategy 2050 progress report and action plan. And this would really summarize the progress made in the development of Strategy 2050 and then outline those next steps to reach the objectives and the purpose. And then finally, for task 7 is to report preparation. That includes findings, both near and long-term, and recommendations for BAWSCA. So we'll have that final report that will summarize all those other key tasks. And then through that, we'll also have some communication materials that we would be able to use. Next slide. Agencies a draft scope of work on March 1st, and we have received edits from them in March. So the feedback from both the board and the WMRs has really been helpful in guiding the task as well as the subtask selection for the scope of work development. But we will be continuing to communicate with the WMR both in May and June to discuss the proposed funding plan using the water management charge. And we will also be discussing the scope of work during the board meeting in May as an informational item. And what we're hoping for is, and the schedule anticipates,
this an emergency preparedness situation. I was surprised how many individuals and departments sometimes who seemed really surprised that the power went out, or that we had a very strong wind, or that we had a really heavy rains, and we shouldn't be surprised, we should plan. So I really like, and that this is long-term planning. I love the grant tool, and that I was thinking for a single entity that would help, and that would also give the opportunity for some of the smaller agencies to band together and put together a grant. And that we also put in there that BAWSCA, we would use this also for ourselves to be looking for this. The one question I had was a couple times you mentioned, especially under project portfolios, you mentioned a specific number that wasn't there, a certain number of those. And I was just wondering if that was a maximum or just a number you were hoping to hit, when you said 5 project portfolios.
Yes, that would be a maximum amount, but if we do want more, there are designated number of hours for each of those subtasks.
Wonderful, thank you. They just didn't show up in the slide. You might want to put that in there and just say a maximum of. Director Schneider.
Thank you. And to build on Chair Hardy's comments at our public Transportation, Public Works, and Communications meeting at Cal City's level, the trend right now in grants is to try to get as many combined projects as possible. So just making sure, and that can be hard. I'm just looking in my own geography. There are 3 different projects from 3 different cities, and they don't necessarily translate, but really the feds are looking for that. So that's a great direction.
Appreciate that.
Because we little guys, we just don't have the staffing to compete with the big guys on that. So I'm happy to see that too, and the disaster component.
Yes, thank you. Director Zuckerman.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this whole study as well. Just a couple of comments. So on the first key task, evaluate water supply, and I think that's reliability is about the water supply primarily. Is that going to include kind of the elephant in the room about we don't know what's going to happen with Bay Delta and our ability to get enough water? Are we going to play a couple of scenarios? Nicole's already smiling. Are we going to look at then a range of what might happen versus the way things are today?
That is something that we would kind of make that decision while we're going through it for Strategy 2050.
Yeah, I smiled because I appreciate the question. And, the team and I don't know that we've nailed that down. I think it depends upon how many other scenarios we want to look at, right? Because you only have so many. And I think I'm always cautious, as you've heard me before, I'm always cautious about BAWSCA tackling that outside of the PUC because, it is the PUC's responsibility and I want to keep that pressure where it appropriately lies. But I also don't want to put my head in the sand. So I think we challenge the project team to see if there's something that they might suggest for that within the context of the number of scenarios that they can look at.
Right. Thanks. Okay, and then I don't know if there's an opportunity. I know you're going to have workshops with board members. That'd be really fun to get involved, particularly identifying new regional project opportunities. On task 7, much as I like reports, I don't like to read them. So maybe you could include a PowerPoint summary or executive summary type approach as well, and we can follow up with a big thick thing for posterity. That would be nice. Okay. Thank you.
I find that a wonderful comment. I took a class from the League of California Cities, and it was called How to Read a CEQA Document.
Ew.
And
does anybody read
yeah.
CEQA?
And The first one, well, they're a great way to cure insomnia. But what I did find that what kind of the way I had been doing it and came up with was a lot of what they suggested, and that is going over those summaries and then going back over the points where there are pressure points, basically, where there's concerns, and skimming some of the other things where there wasn't a concern. So that might be the way to get through those, but I personally am looking forward to it. Maybe I read too much, but thank you. Director Chambers, please.
Yes, thank you. Although my district really doesn't use groundwater, I'm really glad you're looking at groundwater because regulations are very dynamic there. I understand that they're just tightening the PFAS requirements from like 40 parts per trillion to like around 7 parts per trillion. And that really could affect water supplies for those that depend upon groundwater. And then I also understand some agencies have chromium-6 problems. So I'm really glad that we're going to be looking at that groundwater situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chambers. Director Duncan.
Yes, I really like your scope of work, and as I was reading through it, it hit me, all of our agencies recently went through the AWEA certification process, and it seems like subtasks 1C and 1D would really flow into the AWEA, which is due for recertification. I think the bigger agencies are end of 2025, and the smaller agencies are in 2026. So if there would be some way we could have some kind of alignment with the AWEA goals, I would really appreciate that.
Director Duncan, I'm just going to ask you, we try not to use anachronisms. No. Yes.
Infrastructure Act of 2018.
Just say it once and that's
Yes.
fine, but that's
Yes.
for the public,
Right.
to make
Right.
it more accessible. So thank
Yeah.
you. I
And
knew
it-
you
and
knew
it-
what it was.
Some of the directors, thank
Yes, and it is essentially a federal requirement related to the reliability of water systems, and depending upon the size of your system, you had certain levels in which you had to respond about the security of your system. But it was, I think, for the first time, a massive required effort across the nation for water systems. So, yes, good, very good point.
Thank you. Appreciate your expertise as well.
Appreciate that
Wonderful.
he remembered what the acronym stood for, because I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I need to pull it up. We were just joking over here. I was the one that asked for that list, and you notice it's extensive. And fortunately, there will not be a test. You can still look it up. Thank you so much. It is your cheat sheet. Wonderful. We have number 7 CEO reports. Ms. Sandkulla.
Yes, I have 2 short reports. I have a very brief water supply report in which I've just taken 2 snippets here. On the left is the precipitation graphic showing cumulative precipitation at Hetch Hetchy, and on the right is the cumulative snowpack at Hetchy. In both instances, that dark black line is the median line, and the red is our cumulative precipitation to date. You'll see that this is looking to be about a median year, and this storm, my understanding, this storm that's coming in should be a good one. So these numbers will change in the right direction again before we get the final water supply availability report from San Francisco, which is due by April 15th. Storage in the regional water system is at 90% of maximum. So we have both a good current storage level as well as a good snowpack level, which is essentially storage for the future. And water demand is now about approaching the 5-year average, approximately 175 million gallons per day for this time of year. It is expected to increase in the months ahead, though again, I'm interested to see next week's. We get the consumption data on a weekly basis, and it was so wet and cold last week, I'm kind of waiting to see if it dipped down again. But we are in a good position at this point, which I am very, very thankful for. On the Bay Delta plan, the second of my 2 reports, I did just want to call to your attention that the State Board is hosting a 3-day workshop on the proposed voluntary agreements. Those workshops are April 24th, 25th, and 26th. they'll be in person in Sacramento. I would not suggest you want to go to them in person because you'll be there all day. But this is one of the added things through COVID. You can now link to watch them remotely live. They will also be available after the workshops as well, and sometimes it's easier to watch them that way. But that link will take you to them if you're interested in watching them. The workshops will be focused on the proposed voluntary agreements. The VA parties are actually going to be the ones that provide the overview of the voluntary agreements. The focus will be on phase 2, right? So just as a reminder, the Tuolumne is in phase 1. So there may be some mention of the Tuolumne in this workshop, but I think it'll be less than 5 minutes over the course of 3 days. It'll really be focused on phase 2. And the goal is to receive input and answer questions from the board members, as well as receive input from the public. In support of these workshops, the State Board did release some key documents on March 28th. There's a flow accounting procedures document, a non-flow measures accounting protocols document, implementing agreements, enforcement agreements. I'm very excited to see a flow chart that actually we're past April 5th, but I haven't seen that yet. So we're supposed to be available on or about April 5th. So BAWSCA will monitor the workshop, and we are reviewing these key documents as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. I think a flow chart seems appropriate if we're going to keep up with the water terminology. And I will say over the water supply conditions, thank you to whoever did the rain dance or prayed for rain. It sounds like you can stop now. But it is good news. I have sat here in this room and looked out at very dry conditions and worried desperately, and we're in a much better place.
Yes, we are.
In a really good way. Okay, we're going to need to take a 5-minute break.
Oh, public comment.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. And I even have it right here. I should have it bite me when I... Okay, is there any public comment over the CEO reports or any directors? I did not see any director comments. Okay. We will take a 5-minute break. Oh, that's right. Public comment on closed session because we will be going to closed session after this, and we have listed 2 items: conference with legal counsel, existing litigation pursuant to, I don't know if I need to read all this, but the proceedings for Don Pedro Electric Project and the conference with legal counsel pursuant to the water board cases. Okay. Do not say anything. Wonderful. Little break here, and we'll get ready for closed session. Thank you.
Great.
community. I really appreciate BAWSCA's ability to make sure that our water supply is safe, reliable, and affordable for all.
As a member of BAWSCA for 12 years, I've really seen the difference in the growth of what they bring to our communities and families and businesses. Our strategy for future water supply conservation is really funded from the oversight of the capital improvement. BAWSCA really delivers for our communities and businesses.
The formation of BAWSCA 15 years ago was necessary to provide a strong voice for the water customers of Green, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. Through the leadership of then State Senator Sawyer and the supplemental appropriation, 3 bills were authored. Now, San Francisco will build a North American water system, improving the financing authority, and forming BAWSCA.
Dr. Watchard that really brought the political will to try to do something about this unfortunate situation. The SFPUC really controlled the water, but 2/3 of the water users live outside of the governance of the SFPUC. We needed something more.
Fiscal had a report to safety and security of the system to the consumers of the businesses. In addition to that, projects plans in the security and
The second piece of legislation allowed the birth of BAWSCA capital program was designed to minimize the risk of water supply from this is an earthquake fault system. Essentially, it crosses every major road in the Bay Area. We know there's going to be it's not a question of when. And we also know that after a reliable supply of water is fires as well. When the whistle is completed, the regional water system program designed to withstand a seismic event larger than the preceding
The San Francisco Regional Water System primarily relies on groundwater and a series of tunnels to the liquid reservoirs in the region. BAWSCA ensured habitation by San Francisco to ensure repairs and improvements to infrastructure, housing team, and to develop an emergency response plan. BAWSCA has always assured customers of the importance of validating San Francisco's
Oversight of the SFPUC to make sure that BAWSCA is getting fair share, no more, of the system costs. And that saves non-members over $40 million. Coincidentally, the same amount that BAWSCA costs the city. We're covering our costs with just that one
water supply in San Francisco. Safe, reliable, affordable water into the future.
That contract identifies how much water supply they're going to get and what they're going to pay for it. Also incorporated the responsibility for fixing the system, implementing the water system improvement program to make sure that the system could withstand a seismic event, and water quality requirements and making sure that delivered water that met water quality standards.
water strategy for the region by BAWSCA has always supported and incentivized water customers and its member agencies in their conservation efforts. Whether in drought years or not, BAWSCA offers a variety of conservation programs to help water users become more efficient.
Conservation efforts are really critical with what BAWSCA has done with its member agencies. It's been able to access $2.4 million from the state of California grant funds to assist the agencies in their conservation efforts. That saves money for the agencies and it is also tremendously safe. We've saved $2.5 million gallons of water, which equals to roughly 40,000 households use annually.
BAWSCA's been working on water conservation when it was not a drought and when water conservation was not sexy. But I think working on conservation during those times has really paid off because now in the Bay Area, our water usage per person is some of the lowest in the state.
BAWSCA has always defended and protected the interests of all water customers and member agencies it represents, and will always take a stand against any threat to the region's water supply.
We're under some serious threats right now, and BAWSCA is actively engaged in making sure we protect the interests of the water customers as part of those ongoing threats. There's also groups that are interested in changing how Hetchetchee Reservoir is operated. That's something
In the allocation of costs for these capital improvements, promoting an aggressive water efficiency program throughout the region to extend existing supplies, and ensuring that a reliable supply of water is available to meet the needs of the BAWSCA agencies and their customers when and where it is needed.
BAWSCA represents you in the region with other water supply
residents, 40,000 businesses, and thousands of community organizations in the heart of Silicon Valley. They account for 2/3 of all water consumption, pay for 2/3 of its upkeep, and require that the system provide a reliable source of high-quality water at all times.
Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, we're about delivering results to you, the water customer, making sure that you have sufficient supplies to meet your needs today and into the future, that you pay your fair share for water that you buy from San Francisco, and that it meets your needs and is available when you need it, and that it meets your needs and is available when you need it for your community.
As a resident and a representative for my community, I really appreciate BAWSCA's ability to make sure that our water supply is safe, reliable, and affordable for the long term.
As a member of BAWSCA for 12 years, I've really seen the benefits and the growth of what they provide to our member agencies and the families and businesses in our areas. From the strategy for future water supply, from the conservation efforts, from the funding, from the oversight of the capital improvement program, BAWSCA really delivers for our communities and helps us to save water.
The formation of BAWSCA 15 years ago was necessary to provide a strong voice for the water customers in Alameda, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. Through the leadership of then State Senator Jackie Speer and Assemblymember Lou Papin, 3 bills were authored, mandating San Francisco rebuild the earthquake-vulnerable water system, creating a financing
Thank you.
authority, and forming BAWSCA.
We'll have our legal
got to watch our
counsel,
dad really in action.
Ms.
He
Schutte.
brought the political will to try to do something about this unfortunate situation.
shoot,
The
sorry.
SFPUC really controlled the water, but 2/3
We
of
need
the
to have-
water users lived outside of the governance of the SFPUC, but we needed something to be done.
Thank
San
you.
Francisco
I
had
think
to
you're on now.
report
Okay.
to the state legislature. As
Closed
to
session
the
concluded at
safety and
3:31
security
p.m.
of the
and no
consumers,
action.
people using the system.
Thank you so
And in
much.
addition to
Appreciate that.
They were going to have to propose
All right.
projects, plans to
Do we have any
actually
comments by committee
ensure the
members, any
integrity of the
announcements or anything?
The second piece of legislation
We
allowed
do
the
appreciate your
birth of
time. We
BAWSCA,
appreciate you being
and it is
here.
something that will
And
in
we appreciate
perpetuity
Director
watch
Pierce
over
being
the
with us
SFPUC to ensure
remotely
that we all have
and helping us with
high-quality
all our
water
technical
at a fair
realities
price.
before we
Throughout
As we
BAWSCA's 15-year history, the organization
work
set out
into
and
being
achieved a
completely
strategic set of goals that has
technically
benefited water
hybrid. So
customers in the region.
appreciate that.
From safety
All right,
to
we will
cost
adjourn then.
savings to
For the next
conservation.
meeting will be
BAWSCA
June
has always
14th,
focused on
1:30.
delivering results,
And I want
starting
you
with
to notice
monitoring
the
San Francisco's
change in
$4.8
the
billion
venue. We will
water
be at
system
San Mateo
improvement program.
Library, the Oak
The Water
Room,
System Improvement
55
Program,
West
the
3rd
capital program,
Avenue
was
in San
designed
Mateo
to
for our
minimize
next
the
meeting.
risk of
That is in June 14th, same time, different venue. Oh, I just got told there's parking underneath the library. But we will be up on, I think it's on the second floor, if I remember. It's not, it's on the first floor. First floor. It's on the side, okay. It's been years since I've been there, so I remember there was some ups.
the library, but you hang to the left.
Hang to the left as you go in. And there is parking under, and I believe there's parking on ground floor as well, but not as much. No? I must be thinking,
Several floors underneath.
I must be thinking of a different library, okay. This one's in San Mateo, but I wanted to make that really clear to everyone that we will be at a different place. Thank you so much. Well, yeah. If you can walk. We'll adjourn. Thank you.
Okay, hot mic.
Good
luck.
Oh, I was thinking, what is Maria typing about?
Bye, everybody.